I want to give a brief overview on the history of Smichah. And the reason why I'm saying a brief overview is these are the Chuvas of the Rivash, who was from Spain about 700 years ago. And he starts here talking about discussing Smichah. And he goes on and on and on and on to here. We are not going to discuss all the details of it, but to understand what it means today, it's good to have some historic overview.
Just one question. How do you translate the word smicha?
It's literally that which you rely upon, what you lean on. Like, right,
Mm-hmm.
yes. It's not a blanket.
Mm-hmm.
So the original Smichah is what Moshe Rabbeinu gave to Yahushua, right? The Samach Yadav Alav, that he placed his hands upon him, right? He leaned upon him. And this continued in the Gemara in Sanhedrin. We have, it requires for the Smichah to be effective, it requires that the people accept it. And so people say today, Yor Yad Nadin, but that is the incorrect statement of what it means. So when Rabbi wanted to give Smichah to Rav, his nephew, he asked a question, Yoreh, may he teach Torah, right? And the response was, Yoreh, that he should teach. Yadin, should he judge cases? Does he have the authority to judge cases and not be responsible if he makes a mistake in logic and have the ability to force people to appear before him and so on and so forth? Can he judge capital cases and so on? And the response was, Yadin, he should judge. Yatir B'choros, should he be allowed to allow, this is after the temple is destroyed, to allow a firstborn animal to be slaughtered based upon a blemish that he has. This is the type of little blemish that would prohibit it from bringing a sacrifice, and is it the type of blemish that is permanent and will not cure itself over time, right? And they said, B'chorot al yatir, he cannot release the firstborn animals to be slaughtered. See, and they can define the breadth of what the person can do in these ways. Now, the real smicha from Moshe Rabbeinu can only be given in Eretz Yisrael, all right? And that's why we say, Ein Dani Knasis B'Vavel. You have to be a samuch, you have to be someone that has received this authority, going back to Moshe Rabbeinu, to judge cases with a fine attached to it. So if there is a person who has that authority and they move to Bavel, they could judge it, but no one that we grant authority to in Bavel, any place chutz la'aretz, has the authority to judge fines. Can't do it. Fines. There are other things that we can do, but we can't judge a fine like that. And
we have to judge fines, like in terms of the knas.
Right. Anything in the Torah that's called a knas, anything that's not exact repayment for the damage done, is a knas.
Mm-hmm.
And only smuchim have the ability to judge such a thing, or to give malkos, or to give lashes. And this becomes important later on, say 1300 years after the Smichah died, the original Smichah died. So for those things, you have to have the authority in Eretz Yisrael. Now, people were reluctant to become judges if they make a mistake and they're obligated to pay for the damage out of their own pocket, right? So what happens is, if I'm judging Reuven and Shimon, right, and I say Shimon owes Reuven $1,000, and it turns out I made a mistake, it's not that Reuven gives the money back to Shimon. It's that I have to give the money to Shimon. All right? So people were very reluctant to enter into Dayanas. There was in Bavel an institution called Reish Galusa, who was a descendant of David HaMelech, and he was the head of the Jewish community. He sat in the Persian cabinet as an important position. He appointed the judge, the Dayan. And this was he had the ultimate appellate authority in Bavel and the surrounding areas. And he had the authority to appoint the local judges. And he could give what was either Igeris Rishus, which is you are permitted to judge, or Pitka de Dayanusa, and this is actually an appointment as a judge in a certain region. But either of those people, since they have official authority, are not liable to pay if they make a mistake, right? They've been exempted from that by the formal authority that they've been given. The office of Reish Galusa lasted for a long, long time, long after the period of the Gaonim was over. We know that one of the Rambam's Talmidim lived in Baghdad, and he did not get along with the Rosh Yeshiva of Baghdad, and this caused a whole series of incidents between the Rambam and the Rosh Yeshiva of Baghdad. And his Talmid in Baghdad and the Rosh Yeshiva of Baghdad supported different candidates for the position of Reish Galusa. It's inherited somewhat, meaning it has to be in the family of the descendants of David Melech, but it can be any of these various cousins can get it. So they were supporting different authorities, and Rambam's Talmid wrote to the Rambam for support, but the Rambam gave it, and after this point, there was no peace between him and the Rosh Yeshiva of Baghdad. But in the Siddur of Rav Amram Gon, for instance, Rav Amram Gon is asked, the Shaila from Spain, how do we daven? Like, we don't know how to daven. Tell us how we're supposed to daven. And he writes the Siddur of Rav Amram Gon. Except it also says in the letter that's at the very beginning of the Siddur, it's writing to Rav Amram Gon, who's the Rosh Yeshiva and one of the two yeshivas, and to Rav Tzemach, Dayan de Yisrael, the judge of Israel, because he had the authority from the Reish Galusa, right? He was the judge, right? Not, like we have in the outside of Eretz Yisrael where rabbis get together and we decide that we're going to create a Beiit Din or so on and so forth, less so in Australia or the British Commonwealth. But, there at many places in Chutz La'aretz you have the Jewish communities creating themselves and, with less well-defined authority. So this authority that was granted from the Reish Galusa dies at some point. As I said, sometime after the Rambam. I don't know exactly when, but this authority ceases to be in extant. And then what happened in the Sephardic world was different than what happened in the Ashkenazi world. All right? What happens in the Sephardi world is you have recognized Chachamim. There is no formal grant of this authority other than that the other scholars in the community look at this person as a Chacham. For a while, this is what happens in the Ashkenazi community. And at some point in time, it's in the Rosh, but he was not the person who created it. I don't see it right now. One of the Chachamim in France and Germany said, we have people doing Gittin and Chalitzas that don't know what they're doing, and therefore he along with the Chachamim of his generation, decreed a ban on anyone doing Gittin or Chalitza without authority from the Gedolei Hador. All right? Chalitza. Chalitza is when a man dies without children, his wife is supposed to marry his brother. The removing of the shoe is chalitza. So if you don't know how to do that, and the woman gets remarried, that's a problem. If you don't know how to do a get, and you do a get, and the woman gets remarried, then the couple are liable to the death penalty, and their children are mamzerim. This is not a good situation. So therefore, he said, even in the Gemara, by the way, among Rabbi Akiva's Talmidim, it's Rabbi Eliezer. We say throughout Gittin, we say the halach is like Rabbi Eliezer in Gittin, because among all of Rabbi Akiva's Talmidim, people like Rabbi Meir, Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Yossi, right, the most important people in some of the most important in Mishnah, they didn't deal with Gittin. They left it to Rabbi Eliezer. They left it to, he's the expert. Let him deal with the matters of Gittin. All right, so it was not, going back 2,000 years, it was viewed as something that's left to specialists. And it's in the Mordechai that we have this, that only if you have permission from the Gedolei Hador are you allowed to do these things. Other than that,
So it's interesting.
You can't do it.
So a person would get smichah, but they were not regarded as being able to perform.
no, there was no such thing as smicha at this point.
Okay, because smichah ended.
Smicha ended. And so
So
at the time, toward the end of the period of the Balei Tosfos, the Chachamim saw that people are doing these things without knowing what they're doing, and therefore they said, no.
So 1 second, I know we're jumping a bit, but just to clarify, the term we use today, rabbi, when did that, because it,
Well,
it's,
you have Rebbe, right, that is in the Mishnah, right, and that is someone with smicha. You have a Rav that was used in Bavel, and those are people without the formal smicha, but were recognized by all the Chachamim.
so people
as,
like Rashi, Rambam, they never received smicha.
No.
Smichah ended in Tanaic times?
The real smicha for Moshe Rabbeinu ended in Amoritic times in Eretz Yisrael.
So there are some Amoras that are still Rabbi?
Yeah. Rabbi Yochanan and Rabbi Shimon.
Yes, but those,
That was
still
the
the
Lakish.
story, right? He gave him to give the...
Exactly when it ended, we don't know. I mean, at the time the Yerushalmi was sealed, smicha still existed. It seems to exist for at least 1 or 2 generations. After that, we don't know exactly when.
It wasn't the end, when...
Now, so it's ended, and then you have this creation, as I said, in Bavel, right? So that people will accept to be a judge, because otherwise, you could.
So with that, did that end, when you said that ended, did that end because the Rish Galusa ended? Or
Wait, in Eretz Yisrael, there's no Reish
No.
Galusa.
I'm saying, did the when you said it ended when it went to Baghdad, right?
Right.
And did that end because they stopped giving authority,
assume,
or because
I haven't seen anything solid on this, but I assume that when the position of Reish Galusa ended, that there was no one then to appoint the chief Dayan.
So that just ended.
So that smicha is ending. That authority, Pitka de Dayanusa or Igeris Rishusa, right? Those things have now ended, right? And then it's got to be about 300 years later, right? You get in Ashkenaz people saying people are doing things that they do not know how to do. Therefore, we are going to require that you go to the Gedolei Hador and learn from them, and they give you authority to do things, right? That they give you authority to do Gittin and Chalitza.
Now, Chalitza,
Yeah.
my mother had a friend of hers. My mother was very secular, and her friend was quite secular, and she had to do Chalitza in order to marry husband who
Her
was
second husband, obviously.
her second husband, who was not who was quite observant, right? So they went to the local Beiit Din in Sydney, and it simply followed. It seemed to me, from what I was told, it just followed the Torah sequence as written. There was the removal of a shoe, there was the spitting, there was the declaration, and that was it. It didn't seem terribly complicated. Chalitza would
The
be something
sandal
that
has
people
to be
thought-
made in the proper way. It has to be taken off in the proper way. And there are all sorts of intricacies to it. I am not going to give a shir on chalitza. I'm not going to be diverted into chalitza because maybe I might give a shir on it in the future, but it would take several hours to fully explain all the intricacies of a chalitza. So
Okay.
let's just.
So again, the Gedolei Hador were always just recognized as being Gedolei Hador,
Yeah, I
based
mean-
on sort of popular recognition.
Based upon all of the other Talmidei Chachamim, look at these people and say they are head and shoulders above us.
Okay. No, it's
There's
sort of
always
self-electing.
been-
No, I understand. Yeah.
There's always been
Like a consensual, like
yeah,
consensus of the Smichah,
there's
but not
always
really
been a
official.
consensus of who the Gedolim are. There can be more or less in a generation, but there is some consensus that these people are, above the others. Now, there is, if someone appears to worship idols or something like that, there are all sorts of problems associated with that. And the Gemara says, whenever there is a judgment in a human court, then there is no judgment in the divine court. All right? Beiit Din lamata, Beiit Din lamala. When there's a judgment here, there's not a judgment above. After the expulsion from Spain, when many Jews, at least temporarily, had to pretend to become Christians, there was pressure that these people should be judged and given makos. They wanted it, because then God will not judge them for their pretending to be Christians. This is one of the things that caused Rabbeinu Yaakov Bey Rav to do Chidush HaSmichah. The Rambam has this idea that the majority of the Chachamim in Eretz Yisrael agree that they can appoint one person as a musmach. The Rambam says this is right, and then that person can have two people sit with them and appoint other people. The Beis Yosef famously, the Mabit, and several others were given smicha by Rabbeinu Yaakov Bey Rav, and it continued for a couple generations and then ceased.
What year was that?
I don't know the exact year, but it's going to be the early 1500s, early to mid 1500s.
So this is be in Israel, like in Sfat?
It's in Tzfat.
Okay.
Yes.
Was that when there was opposition from the Jerusalem?
There was opposition from the Jerusalem community at the time. The community in Tzfas was much larger than the community in Yerushalayim. So, based upon the idea in the Rambam that it's the majority of the Chachamim, since the Chachamim in Tzfas agreed and Yerushalayim was the minority, therefore he felt he could do it. As I said, there was opposition. There was opposition from Chutz La'aretz, so it did not last for many generations, and it ended up dying out. But that was that. A flash in the pan, so to speak, of Smichah. The idea that someone getting smicha means that they can do gittin chalitzas and dinei Torah judge monetary disputes. That this is what smicha is, or technically a heter hara, permission to issue legal decisions. This goes on unabated, and you have limited number of people that were known for giving smicha. For instance, Rabbi Yitzchak Elchanan Spector, many people came to him to be tested to get their smicha, the Aruch HaShulchan, and so on. It wasn't every Rav, every Rosh Hashiva gave smicha. It was limited to, I wouldn't say a tiny number of people, but a limited number of people. The people that were accepted as the greatest Rabbanim of the generation. Now, you come to the 1920s and 1930s in the United States, which at the time already was the largest Jewish community in the world, and it is the most secular Jewish community in the world at the time. And there is a Rav Shraga Feivel Mendelovich, who is the founder of Torah Masorah, the day school movement in the United States, founder of several yeshivas in New York and so on. And he feels that we have to lower the standards of Smichah because we need more Rabbanim. And if we make these demands, we're not going to get people. And the person who was on the leading person on the other side of the argument was Rav Ruderman, the founder of Ner Yisrael in Baltimore, who said, if you lower the standards, that's all you're ever going to get. And at this point, we break off Yora from Yadin. All right? And there, in the Midwest of the United States and in Great Britain, and I don't know what in at the time the colonies and then the Commonwealth, but you had something that was called a reverend, who was someone that knows how to run a shul. No one had the idea, no one would have occurred to ask these people a shaila, a real shaila, meaning, what do we say? Do we say this or do we say that? And davening, that you ask them, things like that. They give a nice shir and shul and so on.
Could they marry people and things like that?
Yeah.
Yeah, but they were trained to do it. And that all depends upon where. There were certain places in the Midwest of the United States where there was one Rav in the city, a chief rabbi of the city, and he did all of the weddings. They said, this is a serious thing, you do it. Because the Gemara on Daf Vav in Kedushin says, Mish eno yodea b'tiv gittin v'kedushin lo yeh esek imahim. Anyone that doesn't know well gittin and kedushin should have nothing to do with them. So, i.e., if you don't know how to do a get, you shouldn't do a chasana. Now, people often ignore that today, but that is the reality. You should, So Rav Shraga Feivel won the fight, and it was separated Yora from Yadin.
What does your mean again?
Literally, Yoreh, should he teach? Yoreh, he should teach. Yadin, should he judge? Mm-hmm. Yadin, he should judge. They were separated, all right? And Rav Ruderman became a fanatic. He agreed to give smicha to people that were not up to the European standard. However, he maintained the European standard for Dayanis. And only 5 people ever were able to get Dayanis from him. Reb Nachum Rabinovich, who was the Rosh Yeshiva of Malay Adumim, right? Before that, he was the Av Beiit Din in London and so on. Huge Talmud Chacham, wrote multi-volume work on the Rambam, wrote Shilas and Shuvas. Very, very talented Talmud Chacham. Rabbi Yochanan Zweig, the Rosh Yeshiva in Miami, who used to, every Friday morning, I may still do it, ask the Talmidim in the yeshiva what questions they have on Parshas HaShavua. They would all ask whatever they have. He would listen to all their questions, and then they could one shiur that would answer all the questions that they asked. All right? His 2 grandsons, although he refused to test his 2 grandsons because he felt that wasn't fair. So there was a Rav in Baltimore, a European Rav in Baltimore, that he did not get along with. And he sent his grandsons to this Rav. And he says, if he will pass you, then I will accept it. And they both passed. And Rav Yehuda Buxban in Los Angeles, who I'm very close with, and he told me that one of the questions that he got on the Smichah exam was, bring me a raya from a Rashi in Kesuvos for a Tosfos in Yevamos. All right? So you have to know all of the Rashis and all of Kesuvos well enough to know which ones can be used to support any given Tosfos in Yevamos. He told me there were 5 possibilities. At the time I thought of 2. Since then I've found 2. Eventually I'll find the last one. But it's a different...
Closed book?
Yeah.
That was my question, I was afraid to ask.
No,
It was also to be able to paskin a shaila. One of the halachas is that you need permission from the person that you got rov chachmaso, that you got most of your wisdom from. So it's very common for people who are involved in psika, for answering shailas, to work with different rabbanim. And when you work with one, you would get smichah from them. And then you might go to someone else to learn with them as well, to learn other areas that they're more expert in, and they will deepen your understanding, all right? So if you want to continue pasking at this point, this is the person that you've learned the most from, you need smichah from them, and you need smichah from another person and another person. So it is not uncommon for Talmidei Chamim, real Talmidei Chamim, to have a series of smichas. All right? My first smicha was from the Minchas Yitzhak, who at the time, he was from Hungary. He was the Av after the Second World War. He was the Av based in Manchester, and then he became the Av based in Beiit Din. He was not your typical person from Beiit Din, because at one point, Mosader of Cook gave him, they have a prize every year that they give out at the banquet, and they gave him the prize for Shilas and Shuvas for that year, and he went to the banquet to receive the prize. So not your typical person from Beiit Din. I had a chavrusa with his grandson, and he tested on, this is just for Yora, he tested on the entire Mishnah Berurah and all of Yoreh De'ah, not just parts of it. Then I later learned from the Tzitz Eliezer, who was, and my ex-wife was in medical school, and I was teaching a class in medical halacha. I was sent to the Tzitz Eliezer, who was the greatest posek in the second half of the 20th century concerning medical issues in the world, in Yerushalayim. He was a member of based in the Gadol for long time. And he had the ability to write on one subject and carry on a conversation on a separate subject at the same time. Or he could write tshuvas and listen to a din Torah at the same time. There's one time he was hearing an appellate case, so I was there for the last day of it, based in the Gadol. And apparently the case had gone on for 4 days. And at the end of the hearing, when both sides had finished, he put down his pen. He was writing in something entirely different. And he said, so you, the claimant, have 50-some arguments, and he listed them. And you, the respondent, have 40-some arguments, and he listed them, right? There is a machlokas, by the way, whether if you judge as part of a Beiit Din, you have to do this. If you're judging by yourself, if the parties accept you as a judge by yourself, you have to do this to make sure. But if it's a whole panel, so if one of the Dayan didn't get, so another person would get the thing. But there is a debate on this, whether we still have to repeat what it is. So he was strict on this. Even though he wasn't taking notes as he was doing it, he was able to say what it was. I will tell you one other story about him. The Beiit Din Yerushalayim was very behind on doing Gittin. Everything was finished. It was just the final process. The case was the divorce case was finished. They just had to do the get. And he went, the Beiit Din was on the third floor then, and the regular Beiit Din on the second floor. He went down to the second floor and told the secretary to summon 50 couples for the following day, get him this many sofrim, this many witnesses. He was going to do all the getting. He walks into the Beiit Din the following morning. He says to two people, Bo, come with me, sit down. One of them was a Dayan from Los Angeles, who I know. And he said the tzitzilers are flying. And about 10 o'clock in the morning, they had started about 10 o'clock in the morning, one of the secretaries brings them a whole stack of papers of the things that they've already done to sign. And this Dayan from Los Angeles is looking at the first, after the tzitzilers are assigned and giving them the stack to sign, he's looking at it, he says, I don't remember this. And the tzitzilers says to him, Ani lo hoshavti otcha lishol she'elot, hoshavti otcha lachtom, tachtom. I did not sit you here to ask questions. I sat you here to sign. Yeah, and then he informed they have mincha at 2:30 when they finish their hearings in the Beiit Din mincha, and he told the Dayanim, if you get behind, let me know. I'll catch you up, which they really don't like because they get for each hearing. If they do it more than a certain number, this is a horrible system, they get bonuses. So they like breaking things up into a lot of things so they can have more things scheduled on their thing so they can get the bonus. It's a horrible system. But anyway, he took away, right, all of those things, and there isn't much that they could do about it. Then I sat on a Beiit Din in Los Angeles with my Rabbi Shmuel Chaim Katz, who was a very interesting person, to say the least. He arrived in Slobodka when he was 12 years old, which was not uncommon in those days. And when he arrived in Slobodka, he went to the altar of Slobodka, and he talked to you. And based on his conversation, he would write on it, paper is valuable. So he would take a tiny piece of paper, write what your entrance exam was on the piece of paper, fold it over, and you took it to the Rosh Hashiva. And the Rosh Hashiva would open it up and tell you what you had to do for your entrance exam. And everyone was different. So Rav Ruderman, who was a descendant of the Nesivos and Mishpat, he was given a piece from the Ketzos and said, you have half an hour to find all the problems. Very appropriate for descendant of the Nesivos. Rav Katz was told, you have to recite the Shakla V'Tarya of 500 consecutive Blat Gemara. Where do you want to begin? And his response was, wherever the Rosh Hashiva wants me to begin.
You have to recite.
What? The give and take, the argumentation of 500 consecutive dapim of Gemara.
It's more than a seder, even. It's more than most of the seder.
So,
And finding at age 12, he's learning Shakla V'Tarya
of
all of
Shas. And then he started to learn. So, that's what you have to start to learn. I worked for him for several years, and he was in his 90s when I was working for him, and I took all the telephone calls, and I had to work up all the shilas that didn't need an instant answer, and presented it to them, and he would always rip me apart and say, do it again, and do it again, and do it again. And at the end, if he decided not to, I could be right, it didn't matter, it still can be ripped apart if you can't defend it properly. At the end, if he didn't see, I was able to defend my position well enough, he would never say good or anything like that. He was a real Litvak from Lithuania. No such thing ever as a smile. He got, that was the approval. His best friend in Slobodka was Rav Ruderman, and he was roommates with Rav Huntner. So someone from Chaim Berlin did not like the way Rav Katz did gear, and he started complaining about it loudly in the city. A rabbi from Chaim Berlin came to LA. He didn't like the way Rav Katz did gear.
What's gear?
Conversions.
Ah,
And he's sitting at home learning one day, and he gets a phone call from Rav Huntner. And it is a one-sentence phone call. Leave my old roommate alone. And he hears the phone slam down. That was it. So I had done this for several years, and so he didn't test me on that sort of thing. However, there was a test on a European game called Daf Tag. And Daf Tag is Rebbe names a sugya on a certain daf in Shas. You have to name another daf in Shas where that sugya occurs, another sugya found on your daf, and then he will respond with another place in Shas where that sugya is found, and you go back and forth. We did it between 7 and 8 hours. All right? The idea of Dayanis is that there is no place that will be hidden from your eyes when a shaila comes up.
You have the whole picture.
You have the whole picture, right? I can say in my 35 years of sitting on Beiit Din, there is certainly not a parak in Shas where I have not used for proofs for shilas that have come up, even very strange and bizarre places what you wouldn't think it would be true, and maybe even every daf in Shas. I don't know, but many years ago, one of the sons of Rabbi Akiva Eger, Rabbi Shimon Eger, this year they printed his Shilas and Shuvas. And so this is, 150 years ago he was writing. He says, there is a sickness in our day that people who think just because they can read the words of the Shulchan Aruch and find where the halacha is, that they can issue a psak halacha. Right? And they don't know that there can be all sorts of other issues involved.
Because you don't even know it. Because
you don't even know what you don't know. That's right. They don't know what they don't know.
Do you have to also learn Yerushalmi or Beiit?
Yeah, you have to know.
So you have to know everything.
Yeah. When you look at the Smichah requirements from the Rabbanut in Israel, right? It starts with a list of things. I'm not going to get everything, but Shabbos, Eruvin, Basar B'chalav, Teruvos, Nida, Mikvos, a few more things, all right?
It's not the whole Shas?
No, this is just for regular Smicha. And then they have for being a Rav of a Shul, for being a Rabbi of a Shul, for being a Rabbi of a Shul or a teacher in a school.
Oh, like your...
Yeah, and then they have, for being the rabbi of a neighborhood, and it adds more things, and then they have for the Rav of a city, who has to know basically almost all of Orach Chaim, almost all of Yoreh Deah, and how to do weddings, right? Kiddushin, Ksuvas. And the list, of things that you have to know gets longer and longer and longer. And then the next line is for Dayanut, all right? And it reads as follows. Yediot klaliot bebavli v'Yerushalmi uposkim, general, thorough knowledge of the Babylonian and Jerusalem Talmud. Poskim, the authorities, Rishonim v'Achronim, the early authorities, the late authorities. Tur, Shulchan Aruch v'Nosei Kelev, the Tur and the Shulchan Aruch with all of the various commentaries around them. The Shut, Shilas and Shuvas, responsive literature. So it's, you take a whole long series of tests on all of these things, and that covers many years. And after that, you go in for an oral test. For a long time, Rav Dov Lior was the bochen, was the person who tested for these things. And I once asked him what this list meant, and he said, "If I know it, You have to know it. um, so, what does it mean to be, let us call it a pulpit rabbi or what do you call it, a rabbi in a hospital or something like an old age home or something like that?
Chaplain.
Chaplain, yes, thank you. It means that you can say a nice drasha in shul, and that you should know, basic things about how Shabbos and davening works. But it by no means that a person can paskin a shaila. They can be asked the actual question. What I mean by an actual question is, the vast majority of questions that are asked are actually not found in the Shulchan Aruch. They're, you have a series of fence posts listed. It's in between, and how do we deal with those cases? They're really not supposed to do those things. They're given permission to teach, not to, take on the world. And if Rabbi Shimon Eger said in his time there is a disease that people who can read a little bit of the Shulchan Aruch think they can paskin shailas, it's become all the much more so. The other thing I want to say is smicha you get from your Rebbe. It's not a degree given by a university, right? And it's not something that can be given online, right? Because you have to learn most of your Torah from someone. If you don't learn your Torah from someone, there's a problem with it. Why? Because we depend upon Masorah that goes back to Moshe Rabbeinu. If you sit in a closet and read every sefer in the world, right? That doesn't mean anything. You need direction. The Sokachava Rebbe in his introduction to the Eglei Tal goes at length about this. He says he spends all his time directing his Talmidim because that's what you need to understand how all these things are supposed to work. Everything's written down already. Doesn't matter. You need the direction, how to use it, how to understand it, what to do with it. And I got one more smicha many years later from my Rabbi Rav Chaim Druckman. I actually asked for it for political reasons, but and I offered to take any test that he wanted, and he said no. I had already known him for 15 years at the time. But the idea of people judging when they don't have a thorough knowledge is a little bit crazy. I get a very large number of shailas by email every day, a significant number of them from rabbis. And I will say there are 5 types of shailas. There are those shailas that the answer is found in the Mishnah Berurah exactly where you expect it to be. And my response to those is it's in the Mishnah Berurah. Right? At least do your homework. Try and find it. If it's in the Mishnah Berurah but not where you expect it to be, I will give them a cite. Right? The same thing's true of the Shulchan Aruch, meaning the other sections of the Shulchan Aruch. If it's where you expect it to be, I'll just say it's in the Shulchan Aruch, leave me alone. If it's not there, but not where you expect it to be, I'll tell them where it is. All right?
How do you choose which one you cite from? Shulchan Aruch or Mishnah Berurah?
Well, the Mishnah Berurah is only on Orach Chaim.
Okay.
So obviously you can't cite on it for the other 3 sections of the Shulchan Aruch.
But if it's
Then the 5th type of shaila, which is the rarest, is something that's actually a shaila, and that
Well, so you said earlier, like people, they need for someone to give a decision, to give psak on something. They need to ask someone who knows all this. But then on the other hand, if it's just in the Mishnah Berurah, right? Does it even? I guess like
if it's in the Mishnah Berurah, it's there. Now there may be.
So, but my question is, did that say someone emails you and they say it's here. Did they need to ask you that question, or if someone who's a shul rabbi can just make that can say that because
If it's in the Mishnah Berurah, they can say, this is what the Mishnah Berurah says. They don't have to ask. It's already there.
it's only the things that don't
Yeah,
fit.
there are things that don't fit, or there can't,
clear.
I also get shilohs where they say, it says this here, but this is the issue that I have. Right.
Okay.
That's a shiloh, and then you have to judge the other opinions and see whether there's, in this case, we should not follow the Mishnah Berurah, we should follow another authority or
The
something
reason
like that.
the reason I'm bringing that up is because on one hand, you would want Dayanim to be giving sock for everything, but obviously this is a very limited number of people, right? So if you have a lot of people, like the point being that you can't, not everyone can go and get an answer to a shiloh right away, right? So there has to be some hierarchy.
It's much easier now than it was 100 years ago.
Right.
Right.
Okay.
Look at the number of shilas and shuvas that were written a long time ago, because, and look at the date the shilah was written and the date the tshuva was written. Right. It's often can be weeks apart or months apart. Right, because of the time it took for the mail to get there. They couldn't pick up a telephone. They couldn't send an email. Right. I mean,
So really, it kind of comes down to like you could have this structure of people who are just the rabbi of a shul or a community or whatever, or even larger. It's just that they need to understand what they need to, I guess, in a way, also know enough when they can give a clear cut answer
they
or when
should.
they need to ask.
Hopefully they should.
Okay.
Hopefully they should.